Welcome back to the Matter of Facts podcast on the Prepper Broadcasting Network. We talk prepping, guns, and politics every week on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Go check out our content at mwfpodcast.com on Facebook or Instagram. You can support us via Patreon or by checking out our affiliate partners. I'm your host, Phil Rabalais, and my co-host, Andrew Bobo, is on the other side of the mic, and here's your show. So I guess let's deal with the elephant in the room. This is not Andrew. Not by a long shot. Andrew's out of pocket. I snatched Jordan from Phoenix Survival on the Prepper Broadcasting Network to sit second seat with me. And since Jordan and I mean, we've known each other 5 years now? 4 years? Help me out. My memory is a little foggy.
I'd say 4.
2016, I want to say? No, later
How
than
many
that.
How many times have you been to prepper camp?
Oh, a bunch. So you and I bumped into each other for the listeners that haven't been listening for a long time and aren't aware. Like you and I bumped into each other at prepper camp several years ago. Yeah, it was our second year there, and I don't exactly recall how exactly you got wrapped up with us bunch of troublemakers. But we quickly identified you as a fellow troublemaker, so it was a good fit. And then you kind of bullied and badgered and drug along the entire Prepper Broadcasting Network crew. So,
and then I dragged y'all into the PBN crew.
So yes, Jordan is our great enabler. That's probably the best way to put it. But
yeah, that's the nice way of putting it.
I mean, I like nice terms, and you know, great enabler sounds so much better than lead troublemaker. But yeah.
Yeah, I think they call us the brother and sister of PBN now, because we're always picking at each other.
Because we fight like brother and sister.
Yeah, we really do. Speaking of which, off the kilter here, but my partner Chris sees you as my best friend because the whole question got asked. You know how people pop up and you see the stories of, would you kiss my best friend if it meant I would survive? And we all know Willow's my best friend, but he goes, I'd kiss Phil. I'd kiss Phil. He goes, no, for all sakes and purposes, Phil's your best friend for this. I would kiss Phil.
Yeah, the only problem is then we'd all have a mad Italian wife to deal with.
I think in the circumstances, if I'm dying and kissing you is what keeps me alive, I think she might allow it.
You're giving a lot of credit to Sicilian jealousy there.
Well, as long as you don't fall in love with the Polish man, you're fine.
Oh, she would definitely freaking whack me for that. Phil would be sleeping with the fishes after that little exchange. So, cutting the topic, I thought an interesting conversation because, like, I have this revolving list of stuff to talk about on this show because you know how it is when you're a content creator. Like, the hard part is very often not running out of ideas. And this has kind of been on my radar for a while. But I thought it'd make for an interesting conversation to talk about, like, what we're trying to do to, like, prepare our children. Because, like, my daughter's 11, yours range in age from about to join us to
they're going to be 14 soon.
To about to be 14. So like we both kind of have
14, 10 and 8.
Ooh. You have a basketball squad.
I was going to crack a joke, but the joke for my family is I have a Mexican yard crew. I'm Hispanic, for those of you who don't know.
I was about to say, you can make that joke and get away with it. But, you know, we both kind of have the experience of, like, our children are definitely at the age where their interest in survivalism and prepping notwithstanding, like, they're certainly at that age to be able to really absorb some of the information that we're trying to pass down to them. And I was curious throughout this conversation, like, if you're having some of the same thoughts I am, not just about like skills and mindset, but also gear, like planning ahead for what we can do to put them in the position to be able to take better care of themselves if all hell breaks loose. Because like my daughter's 11, and so far That's probably the cleanest way to break this up. Let's start mindset, then go to skills, then go to gear. You have to have a side conversation. That's fine.
Sorry.
It
Uh,
happens.
yeah, it's the door is right there, so it's distracted. Um, the funny thing is as far as gear, I've started them on receiving gear every year as some sort of gift at a super young age. And what really pushed like the water filtration gift or gear,
Mm-hmm.
um, I have a child who, for the longest time, didn't understand the concept that when you're thirsty, you can't just drink out of the pond straight up every time we go fishing, which she was notorious for doing. She got thirsty, face went straight down into the pond. She didn't care. So, water filtration really became a huge one. Everyone has their own water filter. Everyone knows how to use it. I mean, and every year it was another. I give preps as gifts for Christmas. Now, mind you, it's not the main gift, but it's a stocking stuffer
Mm-hmm.
or it's in their Easter basket or something along with everything else. Son got a fire starter, got a knife. Each of the girls have their own mini knives. Their can openers, their P28s, what have you. So each of those is if you start them young enough and you start them working on those skills, then they know what tools they want. Like my son, one year gifted us all this multi can opener slash spoon spork. I mean, it was great. So
Yeah, and,
I don't
and
know
this,
what have you done?
well, in past years, like it hasn't been so much relegated to gift giving, but like I started out really with I started out a lot with like trying to present things to my wife that I felt like she needed. Like she has her own blowout kit slash IFAC stays in her vehicle. She has, like bottled water and mainstay emergency rations that stay in her vehicle. And it's always been with the intent of if you get hung up, if something bad happens, you have some basic gear to sustain you until I can get to you. Because I'm coming with more gear or the ability to get you out of harm's way if need be. And I started off really just trying to explain to my daughter these things are here, this is what they're here for, and this is why you need to have them available. More recently, she got her first pocket knife this past year for Christmas. And I went, I went in the weirdest direction with this because I've kind of been trying to chase where her interests lay. So, like several years ago, she got her first BB gun. Dad went to the gun range all the time. She wanted to start learning how to shoot. I got her a little Red Ryder, and that was what I taught her to shoot with was a Red Ryder BB gun. Even though she couldn't work you know, she couldn't work it. She wasn't strong enough, but she could hold it and shoot it if I cocked it for her. And then we moved her along to a 22, and she learned to shoot that very proficiently. And more recently, she started like hitting me up every single camping trip. Hey, Dad, I need your knife. And it was a 3 or 4 time a day experience. So she got her very first buck knife for Christmas. And I wouldn't say it was the present she was the most excited about, but it was pretty daggum close. Like she went nuts over that because she wanted a pocket knife. She finally had one. We had to go over all the knife safety discussions. But like, I trust her not to do dumb stuff with it and hurt herself. And she knows don't take it to school, don't be stupid with it. And now we're having discussions about the fact that like she kind of wants to get like her own little bag. Like, she wants to get like a little messenger bag that she keeps all of her camping stuff in, like her pocket knife and a ferro
That's
rod and
phenomenal.
yeah, but again, to me, like the key for my daughter, because like with my wife, I can kind of I don't want to say force, but I can kind of push the issue and say, look, I know you're not interested in this, but you have to learn it, and she'll accept that. But with my daughter, I really have to kind of like meet her where she is,
Hmm.
and teaching her to use a ferro rod is something she wants to learn. So it's the natural way to do that is to say, this is what you're interested in. I can turn this into a life lesson. I can give you a piece of gear, teach you how to use it, and I can move you down the path. But I have to constantly assess where is she and what is her in where does her interest lie, and that's what I try to reinforce rather than swimming upstream with an 11-year-old girl who does not want to know how to use a tourniquet. You know what I'm saying?
I get it. That's like when I was teaching my girls how to fillet a fish. They were all interested in, the fishing aspects, the cleaning. They're just now to the point where they really want to learn to cook it. Prior to is I'll clean it, but I want to eat it. They didn't want to learn the process in which afterwards. But I mean, it's each of my kids have their own little IFACs too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of those things, and I try to make it simple enough and age appropriate per child. Just because, my 7-year-old may comprehend one skill set a little bit more than my 9-year-old or my 13-year-old. And so it's one of those where it's like, okay, um, you know, trying to meet them each at their own age level without over informing them on something that they can't comprehend.
Yeah, and the cool thing about specific to medical equipment like an IFAC is like coming and a lot of this I've seen a lot of this in the tech med community, and a lot of it's borrowed straight from the military. But in the military, the idea is always you don't use your kit for somebody else. You have a kit,
No,
they
and that's
they
same
have a
with your
kit.
water.
Yeah, but going back to the medical equipment, if you give your kid an IFAC and they don't know how to use every single thing in there, that's okay. As long as they know how to
Hmm.
use some of it. Because the trick is if they get hurt, someone else should be using their stuff on them.
Right.
So like
And
that's
that's something we've had to teach is, hey, you carry your own water. If someone else goes down, you use their water on them because the last thing you need to do is be without. I mean, it's the same like it was for us, you and I both through training is you never use your equipment because God forbid what happens, you get hurt and you don't have any way to tend to it.
yeah, and as far as like my family going on hikes, like we on a short range hike, I usually will be the one that sucks it up and carries the bag and carries the water and takes the weight off my wife and daughter. But I've also been the first one to tell, especially my daughter, like you need to understand that if we go far enough, I'm gonna need you to carry water because I can't be the only one. Like if a 100 liter if my camel bag does not carry enough water to sustain all three of us for the duration of this hike plus a buffer, I'm going to carry water, you're going to carry water, mom's going to carry water.
Mhm.
So you have to have some of your own stuff. Same thing goes with food. Like my daughter and I are both hypoglycemic, so we it's something that we struggle with, but honestly as we've been eating better and getting more exercise, we've it hasn't really bothered either one of us that much. But we
Right,
both
you find
know
that once you start maintaining, I hate to do this. I finally found out why I'm being summoned. So I'm gonna mute for a second. I'm gonna go tend to that. I'm sorry.
go on ahead. I'll talk to the listeners.
All right, thank you.
But yeah, I mean, my hypoglycemia has not bothered me near as bad since I've been taking better care of myself and eating better, and I think my daughter's is also much better. But it's still this idea that like if we go on a hike that's more than such a duration, you have to carry some of your own food. You have to carry peanut butter crackers or beef jerky, or you have to carry something to sustain yourself. And that is two things. First of all, is teaching your kids the stuff they need to carry themselves to sustain themselves. And it's also just distributing the load because, yeah, being almost 6 feet tall and 250 pounds means I can carry a lot of stuff and take it off my wife and daughter's backs. But it's still the idea that that gear has to be distributed and everybody has to know what they themselves need individually. Disaster averted?
Yes. Poor kid.
It happens. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think that when it comes to gifting gear, I think that's a great way to do it. So pocket knife for my daughter was this year. My wife got one of these because
Ooh.
if you can't tell, this poor old Streamlight I've had in my back pocket for so long, the anodizing is wearing off the aluminum. If that
Oh, I
tells
can
you,
see.
if that tells you anything. That being said, still works perfectly. So like if anybody's ever looking for I wouldn't say cheap, but if you're willing to spend $40 on a little flashlight that you can literally like throw down a hallway and it'll still work, like Streamlight Pro Tacs are awesome. But I got one for my wife. for the exact same reason my daughter got a pocket knife. Every time we went camping, my wife was like, give me your flashlight." So I'm like, "You get a flashlight, you get a pocket knife. Now you'll both have your own things."
You know, it's the same thing I do with my partner. When I found out he didn't have a water filter, I'm like, yeah, I carry Sawyer minis. I like my Sawyer. I like that I can back flush it. You know, that how it works. I love them. And I'm like, okay, here's you one. And I handed him a kit. And the only thing I hadn't done is gotten him the waterproof case yet, because I'm one of those, once you open it, it needs to go in its own container because I'm a slight germaphobe. And with the pregnancy, it's been 100 times worse. So it's one of those where I'll get him a case and I tell him, don't open it until you're ready to use it if you don't have a
Hmm.
case yet. Because yeah. But that was one of those, he just looked at me and he goes, okay, thank you. We're both preppers. But the funny thing is we're very different sort of preppers. He's from Baltimore. I'm from BFE. So I'm good old boy country and he's city slicker McGee over there. So we're very different on our standpoints of certain things.
Yeah, but even though y'all standpoint, even though I imagine like the gear y'all gravitate towards and the skill sets y'all have learned probably divorce a lot, I would imagine that there's a lot of the same methodology involved. Because I mean, at the end of the day, human beings, we all have the exact same needs,
Hmm.
mostly. So like, you need food, water, shelter, and if you're missing any one of those things for too long, bad things start happening. So like, you might have your way. You might go to the Sawyer Mini, and he might go to the case of water, but it's the same thing of how do I get my
Yeah.
needs met?
Well, I think where we vary so much as far as being different, and it kind of equals out with how we teach the kids too, is um I'm, self-sustainability, self-reliance, being as independent as possible, being able to maintain and handle myself, how to utilize my skills. And he's one of those, I'm going to kick down doors and take what I need. But when you live in somewhere like Baltimore and one of the most dangerous parts of Baltimore, it kind of unfortunately becomes a survival skill set in its own just to survive Baltimore. I mean, I
Mm,
know I'm just repeating myself on that, but it literally is a completely different animal than what you and I are accustomed to. I mean, think New Orleans during Katrina, but on steroid crack every single day.
yeah, no,
So,
and like you and I've had that conversation. Like it's not a state secret that like my personal wake up into prepping was post Katrina New Orleans because
mhm.
when you watch a city 30 minutes away from you eat itself, it sets off alarm bells pretty quickly, and you're like, oh, that looks bad. How do I
Well,
avoid that situation?
I'm more concerned at the people who didn't have an eye awakening experience
Oh,
on
you mean
when
like
seeing that.
99% of people?
Right. Most people are so numb and invisible to it. Like my children, we'll have conversations. They'll ask us, "Mom, what does this mean?" Or "What do you do if this happens?" And I was like, "Okay, well let's discuss this. Let's talk about it." Even my 7-year-old. I mean, I'm not a parent who hides information from my children. Now, I don't give them I give them all the information, but I say it on a level that they can understand versus you and I speaking at a level you and I can understand because, well, we're, much higher up there as far as in comprehension that I use terms that my children will understand, but they do typically understand. They asked, prime example, not prepping, but how are babies born? Because they saw something on TV where a woman had a cesarean, and I used terminology that they would understand and explained how they were born, explained where they came from. And they would go, oh, because it kills me the number of parents who, oh, a stork brought this little bundle and set it here. And I'm like, you're setting your child up for so much trauma before they even get a chance. Because then it's like what we say is gold. And in the eyes of a child, and I hate to say this term, but it's almost completely accurate, but in the eyes of a child, you are God.
Mm,
You are their world, everything you say is correct, everything you say is right. And the second you start feeding them these false notions of what the world is, they're going to perceive the world exactly the way you've put it. And then to find out that you lied is devastating to a child,
Mm.
whether it be now, 10 years from now. I mean, it's heartbreaking.
Well, and since you kind of segued us towards like trying to teach children mindset, like helping to shape their worldview in such a way, I had a conversation with my daughter, and it wasn't the where do babies come from. We've already crossed that one off the list.
Right, right. Well, this was actually that conversation was like 4 years ago with the
Yeah.
3-year-old and 5-year-old, but they understood. But
But no, the conversation my daughter and I had recently, and I don't recall the particulars of how it came up, but we, like, mention was made of the family having a set of body armor. And my daughter, of course, like most 11-year-olds who thankfully lived very safe, very happy lives and have never been in a position to need such a thing, she
Mhm.
asked, not even, why do you need that, but why would anyone need that? Now, bear in mind,
That's a good question.
I enlisted when I was 17 years old. I was in
Mhm.
Iraq when I was 21. I was in Katrina when I was 22. I was in post Katrina New Orleans when I was 22, getting shot at by people from New Orleans. I've lived a bit of an interesting life in some regards. So the being confronted with an 11-year-old saying, "Why would anybody ever need body armor?" is like, how do I explain to you the weird situations I've lived through where you literally get shot at every day, and it's just part of life for a little while. But I explained to her like my mindset, my methodology about the fact that, like, there's a reason I don't put this silly thing on to go to the grocery store. Like, this is here in case the family's ever threatened. Because if we are threatened here at this house, I don't have the option to retreat. I don't have the option to grab you and
Right.
mom and run away. I have to protect the two of y'all. And if I have to protect the two of y'all from somebody who's trying to hurt me, I would like to have a little extra help to make sure I don't have to go to the emergency room afterwards. Even though anybody that's ever been shot wearing body armor knows you're going to go to the emergency room anyway. It's just like
Yeah.
this is the
Depending
funny.
on the grade of your armor, you're gonna have severe bruising, if not some potentially fractured ribs.
Yeah, let me just say that, like, wearing body armor does not make you into RoboCop. I really wish it did, but you are. There is a thing called back force deformation, and yeah, you're gonna definitely know that you got shot. You just hope to God that you don't end up perforated in the process. But I explained to my daughter like my methodology, and she accepted that. She was like, "Okay, that makes sense. It sounds like kind of an extraordinary situation, and admittedly it is, but let's call it what it is. Like 90% of prepping and survivalism is preparing for extraordinary events. I mean, Andrew and I, when we talk about a lot of these subjects, we really hammer people on the everyday emergencies because I think that it's foolish to
Mhm.
prepare for like an EMP putting your entire country back into the 17th century and yet not have $500 in a savings account in case you need a tire before a pay date. Like, don't prep for the big stuff and miss the small stuff, but like, let's
But
call it
it's
what it
like
is.
keeping food in your cabinet.
Daggum
I
straight.
hark on that. I hark on that with everybody. Like people who ask me, where do you start? I'm like, how much food do you have in your pantry? I'm like, I don't want you to tell me, but if you were to guesstimate, do you have 2 weeks worth? Do you have a month's worth? Do you have 6 months worth? And they'll sit there and like think about it. Because if you can't give an answer that you feel confidently enough that if prices go phenomenal tomorrow, that you and your family are set for a while. And it's like, huh. I mean, that was something we started on early with our kids is mommy keeps food in the house. We don't discuss how much preps we have. We don't discuss what's in our bags.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we
I'm
we don't. And the kids understand that and the kids respect that. And that's like gun safety, you had said your daughter shoots. All three of my kids can handle all of my weapons. All three of my kids do know where my weapons are. Now, I'm not saying I leave them out where they can do stupid stuff, but if you teach them gun safety and gun protocol at a young age, they're gonna have an understanding and a respect for that weapon that these other kids, you know, these other kids don't. Like my son came home one day so mad and he goes, "Mom, such and such at school was talking about guns, and he was saying this, and this, and I looked at him, and I knew what the kid was saying was wrong. And he goes, he was wrong, mom. And I told him he was wrong, and he got into a fight with me. And I hits a point where you have to explain to your child, when people are that set on the incorrect information, there's nothing you can do to educate them, because beyond that, they were going to refuse anything beyond their own thought. I said, I
Mm-hmm.
know you're correct. Your dad knows you're correct, and you know you're correct. I said, once you've already tried and they are going to put up a fight, I said, don't even bother arguing with them. Because when it comes down to it, you don't change what your knowledge on something that is correct on guns. And it was just one of those, it was really, and the sad thing is it's scary, is this is a kid whose parents let him handle a gun. And the amount of misinformation that that kid was spewing, and the lack of safety, just as like I told my son, I was like, "You'll never go to that house." And he goes,
Mm-mm.
"No."
No, and like we started talking about gun safety with our daughter when she was, I think, 3. Because what happened was I
Nerf
bought,
guns.
no, actually, real
Oh, we
guns.
started with Nerf guns, practicing gun safety with Nerf guns, trigger control, everything. Like, you treat it, you don't put your booger finger on the trigger until you're ready to pull.
See, in my house, we went a slightly different direction, and like I don't say this to say that like this is the way, and I profess this, but this was a decision that my wife and I made. We never had toy guns in this house, ever,
That's
and
fair.
it wasn't that I was like adamantly opposed to them, but I intentionally never bought toy guns. I didn't want toy guns in the house because I told my wife, I'm like, my perspective is everything that looks like a gun is a gun. Guns are not
Mhm.
toys. Guns are not, like, yes, I enjoy shooting. Like, let's call it what it is. But, like, to me, a firearm is a tool. It's for a purpose. It is 110% a lethal implement to end someone's existence, to stop them from hurting you and your family. No more, no less. So, like, I don't get into guns because they're fun and I don't collect. Guns are a tool to me like a hammer hits nails. I'm no
Mhm.
more involved, I'm no more emotionally invested in them than that. So we never had toy guns in this house. What happened was I bought my wife a little bit, it was going to be a carry gun until she realized she really didn't like that gun, so it turned into one of my carry guns and I got her something else, but I got it for Valentine's Day. Now, pro tip, guys, you know you have a keeper when she gets excited about getting a gun for Valentine's Day, because a bunch of her friends were all looking at her like she had 3 heads. Like, your husband got you a gun for Valentine's Day, and she was like, "Yes, it's exactly what I wanted."
Oh, I've told Chris, I like ammo. I like preps. You don't have to bring me flowers. I mean, that's something he randomly does. I said, I like plants that I can use, animals that are multifunctional. I'm a happy woman.
Yeah,
So
but
she and I are from the same stone.
I brought this gun home, and my daughter, I think she was 3. She literally asked my wife, "What is that?" And I looked at my wife and I said, "This is where it starts." Because like we'd had that conversation years prior about there will always be guns in the house. I'm going to teach gun safety. Like, we'd already,
Hmm.
this wasn't a point of contention between me and her. But at the moment my daughter asked, "What is that?" I said, "Okay, today's the day. This is when we're going to have this conversation."
Well,
And
I
the
think
gun
that's
safety
great.
and the gun safety speech at age 3 really revolved around, you are not allowed to touch these things. You need to find an adult that can take care of it, and it can hurt you or hurt somebody else. And that, like, like, it was never a don't talk about it, keep it a secret, because I didn't want to provoke my child or any other child's curiosity where they're going to want to go full with it because they're not allowed to. But it was just to impress upon her the seriousness of, this thing can hurt you or hurt me or mom. So if you find one, you need to come let us know so we can deal with it. I
Right.
basically treated a handgun like a snake.
Now,
Like,
how old was she
you're
when
too
she shot for the first time?
um probably about the first time she ever quote unquote shot, she was probably about 5, but that was
Okay,
pretty
see,
much
the same.
like she had her arm wrapped around the stock and I was the one maneuvering the gun and helping her pull the trigger, because
Right.
she didn't even have enough finger strength to pull break the trigger on this 8.5 pound trigger on this little 22 I had. But like the first time she ever held a rifle and fired it totally on her own was her BB gun when she was about 8. And she's very safe. She's once she spent a little bit of time practicing, honestly, she's as good a shot at 10, 11 years old as most grown men are, which really makes me proud and her mother. And it really impresses a lot of the range officers at the gun range we go to. Because, like, here's this little bitty pretty girl, pretty dirty blonde headed girl, and she is popping those little reactive targets left and right with this 22, like making it look easy, making shots some of them can't make.
I believe
But like I
that. I
said,
mean, she's a tough cookie. I mean, look who she came from between
yeah,
the
my
both of
wife.
y'all.
But like I
I
said, I
was
mean,
giving you a little credit there.
oh
Gosh,
no, she got my eyes and my last name, and that's it. Everything else she got from her mama. But that's
she is
okay.
a hoot.
But yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about like giving kids that mindset, a lot of it does start with like what things we expose them to and the mental framework to understand the why behind a lot of these things. Like going back to guns or going back to the plate carrier, it's not about, oh, I have this gun because I like guns. It's like, no, I have this gun because I would potentially use it to defend you and your mother. And
Hmm.
it's the difference between a person who's not in this lifestyle, not in this way of thinking. They might do similar things for a totally different reason. And I think it's the reason and the why we have to invest in our kids so that they can understand this is the severity of this. Like we talked earlier about like having a really deep pantry, having a lot of food stocked up. That's not that unusual from the way I grew up, and my parents were not, they would never admit to being preppers. I kind of think they had prepperish tendencies. Because, I mean, we lived on the Gulf Coast in Hurricane Alley, and, like, you're supposed to have your hurricane food lined up for the first day of hurricane season. You're supposed to have your peanut butter and your beans and your rice and your bread and your non perishable stuff that doesn't have to be refrigerated. Because if you get hit by a hurricane, you're not going to have lights for 3 or 4 days. Everything in the
Hmm.
fridge is going to be wasted. I mean, like, that's a normal experience for us down here. So I grew up kind of in that mind frame, even though my parents would never admit to being preppers. And when I talk to my daughter about why we have the amount of food we have, it's not just, oh, I want to make sure we have something to eat for a week if we have a hurricane. It's what happens if dad loses his job? What happens if the grocery stores don't have groceries for a couple of weeks? Like, what happens if these things happen? Doesn't matter. I've got stuff out in the garage. I've got stuff in the pantry. I've got stuff in the chest freezer. We are not going to go hungry. We are not going to miss meals. We can probably eat out of what we have for 6 months. And it's the, but again, it comes back to the why. Why do we do those things? And I think that that's the thing that's important to impress upon our kids is so that they can view the things we're doing from the emotional framework we're operating from. And if we can
Hmm.
instill in them that mental framework, then I feel like even if they don't prep the way we would prep, they're still going to have that framework to operate from. And given their environment, they'll make a judgment as adults one day and say, this is what my mom and my dad did because that's what they needed for where they were. This is where I am and I need different stuff, but they're still going to do it. Does that make
Right.
sense?
No, it makes sense. It's funny is you kind of with the whole food thing. What segued me into beginning prepping was I grew up poor, and I mean like I grew up dirt poor with 6 cousins and two siblings in the middle of nowhere, and you know, f- food was hard. Food was one of those things where my mother was a single parent when we weren't with the cousins. There were times we didn't eat. We went to bed hungry, and my that was my big push to making sure I always had food in the house, that my kids would never go hungry. And it's funny is, that's one of those things is I don't like seeing an empty cabinet. If I see my cabinet is empty, it makes me wonder where, as a parent, hey y'all, um, where I'm pushing. So, I push for my kids so they see that, hey, we're we're hungry, my kids won't be hungry. And I've told them, if power goes out, we're good. We don't have to be concerned about, what happens if mommy gets laid off. We've got food in the cabinet at least for the next 3 weeks. So it's just one of those things. They understood all the emergencies. I mean, and when we were in Mississippi, the amount of times tornadoes or storms hit and people were
Mm.
without power, people without water, COVID. I didn't have to grocery shop for the first 6 months of COVID. I mean, the only time I went to the store was for a bag of charcoal for my grill. I mean, it was one
Yeah.
of those things. It was a nice buffer because when people were getting sick and we didn't, we only knew what we had watched when it was only 35 cases at the beginning. It was like, why would I put my family's health at risk for something like that? It just wasn't worth it.
Yeah. And like I feel like the natural disasters, especially like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, like and even blizzards for those of y'all that are further north, like that's probably something a lot of people that's I feel like that's something that a lot of people can latch onto, but I feel like COVID is probably a good thing to talk about for just a second because like that's something that literally touched the overall majority, if not the entire country, and like I know that in the time period I think you're talking about very early on in COVID, where we didn't have data, we didn't have statistics, we didn't know we didn't know what we didn't know because COVID
Mhm.
was so fresh to our shores, and like we felt pretty confident we couldn't trust anything we were getting out of mainland China, and it hadn't even hit the major population centers in like Europe hard enough yet for us to have good data out of there. So the very limited information we had about COVID at that point was it's an upper respiratory infection and it's putting people in the hospital left and right, and that was about all we knew. So like my wife and I sat down and had to have that really hard conversation about what do we do, and we decided pretty quickly. I'm like, okay, same kind of thing you just said about, well, we got 6 months food, so we don't have to go to the grocery store. Like we don't have to go out and deal with
Mhm.
people. We can isolate ourselves. And we came to a very similar conclusion about the fact that, we're going to not cut contact, but we're going to severely limit our contact with other people. We're going to spend as much time outdoors as possible, getting fresh air and sunshine because we're not morons. We know that vitamin D and fresh air are really good for preventing an upper respiratory infection. And if your vitamin D levels get low, which by the way, you absorb most of your vitamin D through your eyeballs from direct sunlight. So if you're sitting outside wearing sunglasses or sitting in the shade, you're actually doing yourself a bit of a disservice. Like, go touch grass and get some fresh air and sunshine. It's
Well,
really
and
good for you.
people didn't realize when it's warm out, you want to be outside. You
Hmm.
don't want to get cold. Being cold in any situation actually will suppress your immune system, which makes you more susceptible, which is why people get sick more during the winter than they do during the summer. I mean,
And it's
it's
also
it's
why
just one of those.
COVID rolled through the Gulf Coast in the summer because
Mhm.
everybody was inside in the air conditioning because it was hot as hell outside.
I see. I like the heat. That's one thing I can say is at least South Carolina has the heat. I've had people, oh, you should move up north.
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
Zeros.
I'm not doing it.
I see every now and then when Andrew wants to screw with me, he'll send me a picture of like 6 inches of snow in his front yard. I'd be
It's
like,
pretty to look at from the picture.
no, no, it's not even
No,
pretty
no,
to
no.
look at. Not even
I'm
in the
I'm fine
picture.
with seeing it from the picture.
No.
Don't
Mm-mm.
don't I'm not going to be in it.
I'm not even fine seeing pictures of it. That is a 0 stars, do not recommend situation
Well,
for
you
me.
you know what to do back though, right? Just send him a picture of a spider.
Ugh. Am I that mean? Yes, I am that mean spirited.
Yes, you are.
But for those of y'all who've been at prepper camp, I still to this day contend I am not the one that hid the plastic spiders around the campsite. I suspect I know
Dude,
who did it, but
I
I
think I
was
know it
not the
was not
one.
me. That was totally slick. It was not me, but I'm just like,
Well, the clearest evidence it wasn't you or me is that we were giggling about it like, dadgummit, we should have thought of that.
right. But the fact they were literally put everywhere. I'm like, that was dedication.
Oh yes, and they kept showing up, so I'm pretty sure somebody throughout that weekend kept distributing them. It was
Right. It
awesome.
was phenomenal because 'cause didn't they even put him in his
Yeah, I I've made a point of not allowing anybody to fool with Andrew's arachnophobia too hard. If his tent and my tent are too close together, like, you know, I don't want to die in a ball of flaming nylon because he fired up a flamethrower.
Oh, okay. So off kilter for a second. So Palmetto State Armory is now here in Myrtle Beach.
Mm.
For those of you who don't know, I am in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Not shy about it. Good luck finding me. That's just one of those things. It's populated enough. But they put a Palmetto State Armory here, and they sell flamethrowers starting at $250.
Oh Lord.
Gasoline fueled though. And my Chris is like, I wanted to get one. I'm like, I don't think I would have been mad if you had came home with a flame.
So, funny story. I work in an office environment, which for those of you who work in cubicle hell like I do, and yet you have like we'll call them outdoorish tendencies. You understand that there is a phenomenal lot of difference in your lived experience and your most of your coworkers. So I came home from prepper camp one year and I was showing some pictures to somebody who asked because like they heard I was going and they thought it sounded interesting. They didn't want to go, but it sounded interesting. So I'm flipping through the pictures and I get to the one where Andrew is literally using his flamethrower to start a campfire. And
I remember.
the first question was, is that a flamethrower? And I'm like, yes, it is. And they were like, I thought those were illegal. And I'm like, absolutely not. You don't even need a background check to get one. You can have one
Mm-mm.
UPS to your front door. And the more I explained to them about the fact that not only could you legally own a flamethrower, but you could do so without a background check or government paperwork, you could see the color draining out of their face. And they
Mhm.
got very upset at this realization, and they finally sputtered out. They're like, "What possible reason could you have for needing a flamethrower?" And I'm like, "Well, it had been raining for 3 days, and the campfire was all the firewood was wet." And like, you could have heard a pin drop when their argument just evaporated. And the person I was originally talking to was like, "I mean, yeah, that kind of makes sense. You would use a flamethrower to start a wet campfire. It sounds like flamethrower might be a good idea to keep around." So
The
there's
amount of heat that those flamethrowers put off, and you're not anywhere close to it, is ridiculous.
Do you know that that bunch of psychopaths were trying to get me to light a cigar with that flamethrower?
There ain't no way in hell.
All I
Pardon
could
my
all
language.
all I could
No,
see was my beard catching fire on my face, trying to pull that stunt off. I vetoed that
no,
idea very quickly. I was like,
no, 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 no,
"There's a
not happening.
there's a less than 0% chance the flamethrower is going to be within, the approximate length of a cigar from my face. That's not
I was
happening."
5 feet from it, and I could still feel the heat off of it. No,
Yeah. So Phil, how'd you get second degree burns on your face? Well, what happened was, especially considering several of us have been drinking whiskey, so I don't think there was anybody sober enough to be a flamethrower operator that close to my moneymaker.
well, that and the cactus juice.
Yeah, yeah, the cactus juice. PBM members, bye bye beard. Yes, I think that was their ultimate goal, was to see if Phil catches beard on fire, but I vetoed that idea because I got to protect the moneymaker. It's not a moneymaker, but still.
It's all right. I tell my patients, so I schedule patients on the phone from home. I tell them I've got a face for radio, so it works
I
out
too have a face
perfect.
for radio. Don't ask me why we started streaming, because neither me nor Andrew are making any money based on our looks. Although he does
It's
sell his
just
body for gun stuff.
it's that charming, delicate personality.
Charming and delicate. Okay. Nina Torville, oh please.
I know right there. I'm like, she knows.
I think she heard your tone and knew you were full of it. I can be
Accurate.
charming sometimes when I'm properly motivated or incentivized. But anyway, so
Yeah.
giving our kids gear is one thing, and trying to teach them the mindset is another. But like, what specific skills have you tried to pass along to your kids? I mean, I know we've kind of already talked about like, specific to like knowing how to use an IFAC, knowing how to use the gear. But like, are there any like big umbrellas of skill sets that you've
Like
tried to
my
pass down to your
daughter,
kids?
my middle is an amazing fisherman. So, I mean, she has a great long cast like I do. I mean, I'm mom's proud about that, you know. Um, so her skill set of being able to fish for me, love you, Gillian. Her ability to be able to fish, I try to hone each of them where they all show promise in different areas. I mean,
Mm.
my um my son, the first time he killed his first buck and I got to help him show him how to field dress. He's he's at the teenager age for right now. He's more worried about being a YouTube star and video gaming than he is anything else. So at the moment, I think it's kind of at a brief pause, and he's at that age where he thinks he knows everything about everything, and it's all wrong.
Mm.
And I love them for it, but that's why the girls sit there, they wanna learn, they wanna know, and I push it. So, my youngest actually, both my daughters are very interested in learning how to cook from scratch. They both love gardening. So, I mean, these are things that I've done over the years, but now they're to a point where my middle goes, "I wanna cook dinner." I'm like, "Okay, what do you wanna cook?" "Huh." It's like, "When you find out what you wanna cook, I will stand there. I will tell you how to do it, but you will do it." And I think I'm one of those parents who they can watch me all day long. And that's how I can learn. I can watch you do it once and then I'll do it myself. And it's to a point with my girls that it's like, okay, it's time for hands on because there hits a point as parents. We really have to step back and pull our hands completely out of the mix. Not saying you can't stand and watch, but you have to let them get their hands dirty and you have to let them make mistakes. Because if you're that parent who's trying to micromanage everything, you're not doing them any favors because then they're going to get that codependent mindset that they have to have you to be able to complete a task, and that's not the case. Like, not at all. Whether it be hand sewing a rice pack so they have a heating pad. I mean, I know that seems minor, but for a young woman, for a girl, that can make the world of difference for sprains, backaches, cramps, etc. You know what I mean? Just for
Mm.
even for you, if you pull a muscle or you're sore. But that was one of those things that when I started teaching my kids to sew, I showed them how to use the sewing machine for their first row, and then after that, I told them what to do, and they made their own little pillows, and so it's literally yes, and it is hard. It is hard to let your hands go and to let them do it because I mean, as parents, we don't want to see our children fail. We don't want to see them struggle, but I mean, I didn't have I didn't have parents to teach me throughout the years like I learned. I was probably one of the only ones growing up who was into being out in the woods, survival. My mother called me an anarchist because I was a survivalist. And, it is what it is, but no one taught me these life skills. I had to learn it myself. So I want to teach my kids, but I need my kids to also learn there's going to be mistakes. Anytime they were running and they fall and be like, well, you fall to get back up again. What did you learn? Let's keep going. I'm that parent. I tell them, don't put your hand in that cage. Well, if they put their hand in the cage and they get bit, I gave you a warning. I should not have to tell you 100 times. I should not have to be that parent who's, no, 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 no. No, I should tell you once, and once is all you get. If you get hurt, now I don't want my kids hurt, but if you get hurt or if you get burned or you get bit, I mean it's tough parenting, but I think but I think in the grand scheme of things, more people learn from their own mistakes than they do from hearing about your mistakes. So I can tell them all day long the things I did and I messed up, but they're not going to take that as a learning moment. You could tell Piper all day long, "Well, you don't do this because you're going to get hurt." Well, I mean, it's kind of like the first time you put your hand too high up on your gun and you get caught on the slide. Now, I've gone through enough training. I have, knock on wood, haven't had that happen, but it's not to say it's not possible. Well, first time my son got his pocket knife, and I'm like, "Son, be careful, it's sharp." And you hear, "Oh,
Oops.
shit." And it's like, "You cut yourself, didn't you?" "Yeah, I did." "What'd you find out?" "It's sharp." "How bad is it?" "It's not bad." I'm like, "Okay, wrap it up. We'll keep going."
Yeah.
It's that simple. Children have to learn.
Well, and I think what's important to remember is like it's not just that you're teaching specific skills, but you're also teaching perseverance. Like you along somewhere along the way of teaching our child everything that Gillian and I are trying to teach her. And Gillian said earlier, like that's what this summer has been. This summer has been encouraging Piper to go into the kitchen and make her own lunch, and encouraging her
Mhm,
to use like, like she's been baking with me in the kitchen and cooking with Gillian to some degree with supervision for years because Gillian and I both know how to cook, and we both do a lot of cooking from scratch. I enjoy cooking from scratch because I feel like it's
mhm.
healthier to not have all the preservatives and the crap in your food. And I enjoy the fact that, like I have that ability to just look into a pantry and say I've got this and this and this and I can put something together, like it's not my whole world is not what cardboard box with foil tray did I take out of the freezer. Like that just makes me cringe to think that's how some people conduct their business as far as feeding their families. But for Piper it was always, hey, if I could get her to like put down whatever she was doing long enough to come and join me, and a lot of times bribery is involved, and that's fine. Especially when you're teaching kids to bake sweet stuff, you can bribe them with a spoonful of batter, and they will do just about anything for you. But like I was always bringing Piper along, saying, "I want you to learn how to do this. I at least want you to have the experience of what does it feel like to whisk stuff properly, so that it's actually mixed properly." She was helping me make a pan of brownies because we were going over some family's house the other day, and I let her do all the work. And then when it was done, I kind of tilted that bowl up, took the spatula and scraped the bottom, and found some powder, some flour, and everything that wasn't fully mixed. And she apologized, and I'm like, this isn't about you apologizing. This is for me
Mhm.
to point out. This is why you have to make sure you take that spatula and you scrape the bottom and make sure you get it all the way mixed. Like you have to make mistakes to learn how to do this. And if you make that mistake and I point it out to you and I tell you how to fix it, hopefully the next time you'll think to yourself, oh, I need to make sure I scrape the bottom once or twice to make sure I got everything off the bottom, it's fully mixed.
Mhm.
Or like when
Well,
she was
you still get
whisking,
burned.
or that. But it's also like I was teaching her how to we were whisking together the butter and the sugar to make brownies, and I let her do it, and she hadn't quite got through whisking everything by the time I threw in the eggs, which thickened the whole thing up. So I temporarily took over whisking, to really like work into it and beat it and break it up. But then I passed it back off to her. And I think like that's something we have to do as parents is when we're teaching these skills, we have to like step in to the degree necessary so that
Right.
they can have a victory. Because to me, the most demoralizing thing for a child is to fail in such a way they can't recover or they can't
Oh,
push through or complete the task. So to me,
absolutely.
I try to make sure that if Piper's going to have a failure, it's a failure she can recover from, or it's a failure I can help her recover from. So we don't have to just
Mhm.
start all the way over. But if I see something's about to happen, it's going to spoil the whole thing, I'll step in and be like, well, let me help with that for just a little bit. And then put it back in her hands and say, now you continue what I've shown you. But yeah, I mean, cooking from scratch, Piper's been lately, she's started teaching herself how to crochet. Kid after your own heart. She
Alright, so
just,
I gotta set up a video chat with her because I would be more than happy to give her lessons.
you know what? Funny you say that. She went to YouTube University, looked up a bunch of videos, and sat down. Like we went to Hobby Lobby and bought her a couple things of yarn and a couple of crochet hooks, and she just sat down and started doing it. So
You're gonna laugh.
she's,
I'm texting Gillian who she needs to have her daughter look up real quick.
hey, we won't turn it down. But I mean, to
But
me, this is
seriously, if
like,
she ever wants to um wants one-on-one, I am all for it because I love crocheting. I mean, I've got a pair of baby uh slacks and it's gonna be like a Peaky Blinders outfit for him to
mm-hmm,
come home in.
yeah. And see, this goes to back to one of those things that like I learned how to sew. Don't ever ask me to make a pretty looking stitch, but I can stitch things together so they won't come apart, but it looks like a meth head stitched it. I mean,
See, and
it's
I
not
love
pretty.
sewing.
Yeah, I can't use a sewing machine to save my life. I've tried. I can't figure the daggum things out, which sounds weird because I can fix cars and helicopters and do all build my own guns and all kinds of weird stuff. But I can't friggin' figure out how a sewing machine works. Maybe I'm a little autistic in that way, but like I can sew by hand and I can do some pretty basic stuff and I can make some repairs to fab to clothing. But then I have my child over here who's learning how to use a sewing machine, who knows how to friggin' like finger loom, and she's learning how to crochet and she's doing all this stuff. And it came back to she expressed interest in it. I think it's a good skill to have because I know you can make stuff by crocheting.
Hmm.
So I'm encouraging her to pursue something that she's already interested in that I think is a good prepper related skill to have. I mean, knowing how to make your own clothing can come in handy sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I started crocheting and sewing when I was probably about 7, like fully on my own. And ever since, that was my growing up for, that was my side hustle for an extra income, whether it be repairing my own clothes, whether it be selling hats and scarves at school because money was tight. So that was the only time I had money for myself. And even today, I still crochet and sew, and I sell. I sell what I make, and I've got a full wool sweater made that's ready. And, I just have to, now that I'm have a little more downtime, I can start posting and putting all my stuff up and put my content back up. But I mean, it is, if I could make a full career out of crocheting and sewing and my hand embroidery, I would. I mean, I love it. I absolutely love it. I
But
mean, it
yeah,
it keeps me happy. But it's you're right on the whole when they do make some mistakes. I'm not saying like step back completely, but there are times where we do have to step back. But you're
mm-hmm.
right on something like that, you've got to show them how to get past the problem, but you also have to make sure your child is, it's going to depend on the child. Some kids are like, what do I do here? And then you have other children who are so stubborn, they refuse to ask for help. And if that child is not going to ask for help, even though you've offered it, I'm just like, you know what? That is where I completely step back. And it's not because I don't want to help, but if you are offering the help and they refuse to take the help, then I take that as a learning experience of, hey, so this is what happened. Now, do you want to go back and let's review this? Do you understand now that I could have given you an answer that could have prevented this outcome? And then we'll sit there and discuss that. Elsewise, you can only, it's kind of like with most stubborn adults, you can only help them as much as they want to be helped. I mean, you've got a child who will look at you and say, Dad. And you already know all she has to say is dad.
Mm-hmm.
But there are children out there who, hey, do you? No, I got this. Okay.
Yeah,
All right, big shot. You got this.
mine has her moments though. Sometimes some of that comes
No,
from me, so I
she
can't be
doesn't
too
act
mad
like
about it.
you at all.
Thanks, Jordan, little butthead.
Big butthead. Heck, I'm rounder than the whole PBN crew.
Well, I already told you you quit smuggling watermelons home, then that'd stop happening.
You know what I've missed?
Hmm.
Side note, I've missed a cigar so bad.
I I sympathize, but
No, no, I'm happy I haven't, but I do have my little box waiting for me that I've already got the cigar picked out afterwards, so I can just, that is one of my guilty pleasures, is being able to sit with y'all and enjoy a cigar.
I'll smoke one in your honor. How
A
about that?
Fuentes. I
Oh
need a
hell no.
Fuentes.
Mm-mm.
I like a Fuentes.
Drew states ain't gonna have me smoking
Oh,
Fuentes.
Moderno.
Lately it's been Tabac Specials and Javas.
The Javas are okay.
The Javas are okay. Tabac Special I kind of appreciate a little more, but
I got you, Nina. You'll have to message me. Sorry, I just read the messages. And real quick,
yeah.
Gillian is right. Our generation pretty much was feral. So we were raising our kids, as she says, in a lot of the same ways. I think you're right. We grew up drinking out of the water hose. I know we weren't allowed back in until it was dark. We rode our bikes. The number of times I was up in the top of trees catching snakes, how many times I came home with copperheads in my pocket.
Mm.
They were baby copperheads. Hey, that doesn't make it better, but I came home with one in each hand
That doesn't make
and
it any better.
no, it doesn't. If anything, that makes it that much worse. But I had it literally one in each hand, and my mother is over there like they're just baby.
Oh, Jesus
And
Christ.
I knew they were copperheads, and I knew they were venomous because I was that child who decided I wanted to be a herpetologist at a young age. So I love identifying all the venomous and non-venomous snakes and animals around my neighborhood. So I was always catching toads, snakes, lizards, you name it. I was that kid. And the sad thing is, I did that all throughout my teenage years. I still do that as an adult. Like, oh, snake. Tink. I just
You and my wife and daughter. You and my
yes.
wife and daughter.
Yes.
My wife is actually the designated snake catcher at the school she works at. Anytime they find a snake on the property, somebody will go running to find my wife for her to go grab the snake and relocate it off the property. Which I guess is better than killing the poor things, because most of the time it's just garter snakes and they're not going to hurt anybody.
Partners, no, but
But my wife will come home with snake hugs on her hands and her arms when she grabbed it and it nipped her. But I guess kind of wrapping this up, like there was one more thing I wanted to bring up, and to me this kind of falls back under mindset. But like one thing I try to do with my daughter, and I would suspect you may have done this with your kids. And for the listeners out there, like if you haven't had this opportunity to do this with your kids, I encourage you. But like I try to use real life events as teaching moments. So
mhm.
like, post Hurricane Ida, which admittedly was a really nasty storm, we were out of power for 8 days, and we fell back on our preps. We fell back on our food. We fell back on our water because the water pressure went down to zero the day after the hurricane, and it took some time to come back up. And we were under a boil water advisory for 30 something days afterwards. We were out of power for 8 days. There was no food to be had at the grocery store. There was no gas to be had at the gas stations. Like, we literally fell back on everything we had ever put aside specifically for moments like that. So, that's kind of an obvious teaching moment for your kids to be like, hey, this is the reason why mom and dad do all this crazy stuff. So, when something like this happens,
Mhm.
but you can also make it like little stuff. Like, not too long ago, my wife's the battery died in her Jeep, and it just so happened I had a one of the little battery jump packs that you can hook on your car and you could jump it to get it going, and it was like perfect opportunity to use it so I could start the vehicle and move it so I could do what I had to do and then go get a new battery. But I brought it up to my daughter to say, hey, this happened and I had this piece of gear and it was charged, because every 3 months I take it out of my vehicle, bring it in the house, top off the battery, make sure it stays hot, ready to use. Or if we have a situation where somebody gets a cut or somebody has a headache or whatever, and I have to dip into the medical kit that stays in the back of the truck, and that's another teaching moment to say, hey, look, we don't have to go home, we don't have to go find a drugstore. Like, I have Band-Aids, I have Tylenol, I have Benadryl, I have these things in case we need it. Or I've been in a habit of carrying water in the truck for a long time for obvious reasons, because if we don't drink it for a while, bad things happen to us. So anytime my wife or daughter get thirsty, and it's not even an emergency situation, it's just, oh, I'm thirsty. There's 2 bottles of water in your door. Snatch one up and drink.
Mhm.
So it's I look for the opportunities, and I encourage the listeners out there to also look for those little daily opportunities as teaching moments to try to show your kids, this is the reason these things are here. This is the applications. This is why when they come in handy. And it's like I find that talking to, I call them the normies, which is not meant to be a pejorative. It's kind of tongue in cheek, but like the non prepper survivalist affiliated. I go as far away from the zombie apocalypse, EMP takes out the country kind of nonsense as possible, because you lose them the minute you go there. And I try to talk about natural disasters because that's something that they can kind of latch onto and they can build a framework around. And with kids, I find that it's difficult to talk about a natural disaster if they haven't experienced one themselves because they can't build a framework around something they've never experienced or can't envision. But if you find something that they can envision, like, oh, we were at the park and I skinned my knee and Dad had stuff in his truck to take care of my skinned knee. It's those little daily experiences where you can
Mhm.
build in those teaching moments to show your kids and start to develop that mind frame of this is why I have these things, this is why they're here, this is why they're staged the way they are, this is why things stay, this is why I check my tires before we go on trips, this is why I check my oil before we go on trips. And you build all those little teaching moments in so you can teach your kids to plan ahead, because that is
Mhm.
ultimately the mind frame we're trying to pass along to our kids. Is you don't want to wait until you're in a bad situation before you start thinking about what could I have done to prevent this. We're
Right.
trying to
Do
teach
you
our
also make
kids.
it do you make it fun for your kids? Cause like or your daughter? Cause like, for me, a big one and when I first started out, we'd get power outages, we had tornadoes, we had, Tropical Storm Barry flooded us, but, like, for my car kit, my emergency kit in my car, or my everyday, I kept glow sticks. Literally kept glow sticks just so if they broke down and it's dark, if the power went out, it's dark, they had a way of being able to entertain themselves and keep themselves calm in those situations to the point the kids would ask, "Do you have the glow sticks in the car?" Just because it's like if they have something to look forward to for a situation that could be outright scary, then it gives them that option to understand and then interact. Hey, this is also in the kit. Mom keeps nabs in there, the peanut butter crackers or fruit snacks or we did fruit snacks for a little bit, but with the southern heat, it kind of melts those relatively
Yeah.
quickly. Nabs holds up great. Water or, just one of those things where if we kept things that were obtainable, then it does become the norm. And then it hits a point of, what do you mean other people don't keep this in their vehicles?
Yeah, I have not been great in the past about trying to make this stuff fun necessarily. Um, I don't know. Frankly, that's why I'm married to my wife, because she's smarter than I am in a lot of ways. And she thinks about these kinds of things. Like, how do I make this stuff fun? But I, I say regardless, like the most important thing to me is that we teach our children this mind frame, because if you teach them the mind frame, they will seek out the skills. They will begin to get the gear together, and they
Mhm.
will do those things into the future when they are no longer within your nest. Because, like, sooner or later, our goal is to turn children into functional, self-sufficient adults.
Right.
And somewhere along the way, we would like for them to be able to dig themselves out of trouble if they get there. And if
Yeah.
we gotta populate their little brain box with the right
Well,
mind frame to do that.
we don't want them to be, as you say, the normies, in which we want them to have what I would call a healthy level of fear. I don't want my kids to always be afraid. I just want them to be vigilant and aware of the possibilities and when they do need to be concerned or fearful in a sense.
Mm,
Um, Only because and that's why I think I try to make things fun in a sense is because I want my kids to have a healthy level of fear. There's a time to be scared, there's a time to be worried or concerned, and then there's a time not to even be upset at all. Tornadoes are scary. We've gone through our share of them. Each of the kids would put on their packs, we'd sit in the hallway and, we talk it through and I tell them, it's okay to be scared. We don't need to be frightful, but it is okay to be scared and concerned because, a potentially dangerous thing could take our lives. I didn't say it like that, but as a parent, we think that. And it's like, what can we do to show our kids I don't want my kids to be fearless. And not in the sense that I don't want them not to be scared, but if you meet some people who are just straight fearless and they don't fear anything, that's that's as dangerous as being scared of everything. You need
mm-hmm.
to have a healthy level of fear and control in your emotions for those situations. Like breaking down on the road can be scary, but it's not something to be scared of unless you're in a situation, like SHTF, then that's a whole different thing. But that's why my kids are taught vigilance. We're They all know mommy's carrying. Hey, mom, do you have your gun? Yes, I do. Don't have to worry. Do you have it in reach? Yes. And the second one's in your reach if you need to grab it. It's just one of those things.
Mm.
But I think as parents, as you and I and Gillian and all the other parents here, is we want our children to have a solid mindset even when we're not 100% sure, but we don't want them to be scared of everything. I mean, that's kind of like, oh, bless her heart. I love my dear friend, but her kid's scared and terrified of ants. And he screams at any bug that walks past, and it's like that's not healthy.
Well, and my concern is on top of the being scared is one thing, because the thing I tell Piper all the time is like, I allude back to the time I spent in Iraq, which was before she
Mhm.
was born, and I'm like, do you think I made it? Do you think at no point in that year I wasn't scared? Like, I was scared multiple times because they were dropping mortars on us every day, and that kind of
Mhm.
that's a very upsetting experience. The first 8 or 9 or 100 times it happens, eventually you kind of get used to it, but I tell my daughter, I'm like, the thing of it is that you can be scared, but you can't let the fear overwhelm your mind. You have to be in control of you have to control the fear and control yourself so that you can act to get away from the danger. And that's what separates what you call a healthy fear, I would call a controlled fear, from a person who's overwhelmed by it, which we didn't even really get into, but I do think that's an important thing to try to get these kids to understand is like you can be scared. You should be scared. Things are
Mhm.
scary. Look,
Well, I have to
they
tell him I'm scared, but I'm going to handle this.
yeah. Well, and I'm very frank about the fact that like, some of the scariest moments in my life in recent times have been around my wife and daughter. It's been, when my wife was in the hospital or when my daughter fell off her bike and broke her arm. I mean, it's things like that that scared the holy hell out of me because I'm a father and a husband. Like, why wouldn't I be? But it didn't cause me to lose control of my own emotions where I couldn't be that
Mhm.
calm presence to like control the situation and help them not be more scared and like just kind of deal with things. So I think that even though we really didn't hit on it for very much, I do think that teach that is part of that mind frame we're trying to teach. It is teaching our kids. It's another way of trying to teach our kids how to be able to take care of themselves. Because one day, mom and dad are not going to be there to take care of them. They're going to have to do it by themselves. And
Well, I
let's
think
call it what it
that's
is. For purely selfish reasons, they are an extension of our genetic legacy. We would kind of like to see them stick around for a while.
yes. Well, and that's what I tell people. They ask, "Well, why do you teach your kids?" I'm like, "Because I'm not going to be around forever. I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. I do have to know that if I were to die tonight or tomorrow, my kids can still survive and take care of themselves because how many adults do you and I know who can't boil water or their parents are still doing their laundry? I can list 6 off the top of my head, and it's sad because I'm a grown woman with a teenager and 2, about to be 3 littles, and it's one of those things where I want my kids to be self-sufficient because we were at that age, we were beyond taking care of ourselves. I was running a household by the time I was 10 by myself. So, I mean, I would never make my kids live the same life I did, but I want my kids to be strong enough to know that if something happens to me or hit their dad, they're taken care of. And not because someone else won't. I don't trust anybody else to take care of my children at the same level I would take care of my children.
No, that's kind of fair though. So you got anything else to drop in here before we call it for a night? I've got a wife to go harass, and you've probably got a partner to harass too, and littles to chase.
Well,
I'm
the 3
surprised.
are terrorizing him, so I'm
Well, it's not like the last time we had you on the show where like you had one in your lap and one running around behind you. So they're
they've now I told him I had a meeting. So now they just barely tap and then whisper. So if you saw me looking over, it was why, or the oldest was texting me to make sure, hey, da da da. So no, yeah, that has been a while. But no, try waking up from a nap and you find your partner in your middle wrestling and she's using the blood chokehold that you may have taught her.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Well taught.
So when you wake up and you see legs hanging off the side of the couch because people starting wrestling because we got one in jujitsu, one in gymnastics, they're all solid. So I'm just like, not my it is my monkeys and it is my circus, but at that point in time, I'm like, I'm not in this circus ring at the moment. I'm just gonna sit back and watch the show.
So what's going on before we walk this out? What's going on with the new podcast? I know you've been in the process of rebooting things for a while, and
Yes, so
I'm waiting. I've been
it
watching. I
it
haven't
has
seen it yet.
been it has been a rough year and a half. I think I've only put out like 2 shows. And for those of you who don't know, I actually had a terrifying health scare and went uroseptic and had
Mm-hmm.
to go through a week of infusion treatments. Didn't get to go to Ohio. Like this website I've had built, I just had to come up with the funding, has been put on hold again because I have it. I just, you know how it goes, just trying to get your site up. Takes a little financial assistance on that one. But once after this week, I'll actually hopefully be putting out content. I've got a list here of things I want to run, of shows I want to do, of content. Um, but it really is, it's Phoenix Survival. I'm gonna be back on PBN. I'm gonna try to aim for Saturdays again. There for a while though, when I couldn't do the live shows because of other legal issues, I was actually doing in-person live chats on Element with our listeners, which I know Nina from and a few of the other ones would pop in and we'd literally sit there and talk about prepping, we talk about cooking. I showed how I made pickled eggs. I had the one-on-one interactions. You make a face, but it's delicious, okay? It's delicious.
No,
Ask
it
James. James has
no
had
it
them. I brought them to
no.
prepper camp. They were phenomenal. You're just a snob.
That's I call me whatever you want. You can have your pickled eggs and I'll pickle myself with whiskey and we'll call it even.
Right, right. Fair enough, fair enough. But it's one of those where I hope to actually even be able to set it up to offer online classes for the crocheting and the spinning because I've had such a huge outpour with the spinning classes I teach. I did Ohio. Unfortunately, I was supposed to do Alabama this year. This year, it's just I'm finally getting back to where I need to be, but I'm hoping, I'll be at prepper camp for all the listeners who are going to be there. I'm excited to see everyone with an extra little in tow. So that's going to be fun, is camping for the first time with a potentially a 1 month old.
Ooh,
If not, he may be, well, I don't know. I'd be surprised if I make it a few more weeks. I mean, I'm 34 weeks now, but none of my kids make it full term. So
I was about to say, but based on what I saw before we got started, yeah, you ready to pop any second now.
I get asked that a lot of, "Oh, are you due any day now?" I'm like, "No, I got a home month."
Well, but then bearing in mind that you ain't been about this big around to begin with, so there's not a lot of places for a baby to go.
Right. Oh, you know what? I had a woman actually think I was fat. It tickled me so hard I wasn't even angry. She just literally thought I was fat. She goes, "Oh, I couldn't tell you were pregnant."
Yeah, okay now.
I don't
Right.
know if I should stand up so the listeners can see. It is literally all belly.
I've been referring to her as the watermelon smuggler for a while,
It
because
it, it is all belly.
like I said, you're smuggling watermelons.
Yeah, it is all belly, but yeah, I had someone think I was fat. But no, Phoenix Survival is going to be back on content with prepping, parenthood. There's going to be a little Phoenix involved now, and then you're going to get all of the other sorts of the textiles, the spinning, the crocheting. I'm really hoping to branch out into that. I told you the career I'd love to do is make my passion something that is even more, because I've made holidays, I've made Christmases and hard times work with my extra income just from crocheting and sewing.
Yeah, well, definitely when you start getting the content rolling again, let us know. I'd love to help you promote it because I mean, call it what it is. Your older brother is like I've been gentle, not kicking your ass about get it going,
You know what?
but you got to get it
You
going.
coming from the big brother who has not been sending me pictures of the foraging bag I've been asking about.
You got my wife's. First of all, my wife's the one with the forage bag. You got her number.
Well, I'm supposed to blame the brother, not the sister-in-law.
Of course, blame the brother, not the sister-in-law. Let's go ahead and roll this one out
All right.
before I have to start calling my adopted sister ugly things. But
Fat's
yeah,
okay.
that's it. I'll just call you Fatty. Matter of Fact's podcast heading out the door. Jordan from Phoenix Survival. If y'all leave me comments, I will pass them along to her. We will harass her into action to get her back into the content game on PBN. Talk to y'all another week. Good night, everybody.